Good evening. It's nice to have you all come and be in this circle. My name's Len Rowell. We've been working with a group called Story Matters for about the last 2 years. And we are a group that gathers for the purpose of saying that story matters. And we are here tonight to look at all different possibilities that exemplify that and make that happen. And we're just excited about our resource person. Let me give you a few little bits of details. We're going to televise this tonight, and it'll go on MCTV as a part of our program. And we thank Dick for coming and taking care of that for us. Just pretend it's not here. Speak up, and we won't pass the mic around. This event is about people relating to each other in stories, and we don't want to get caught up in microphones and all that kind of stuff. Second thing, we want to encourage us to enjoy each other, and we'll have time for movement and talk, and we have cookies until they're gone, which won't be long. Brian will take care of that. So Brian is going to introduce our guest. And at this point, right here.
Okay. Hi, my name is Brian Alexander, and I feel silly saying this with a microphone when you're 10 feet away from me, but for the future audience to come, I want to introduce Barbara Ganley and do it very, very quickly, and the most appropriate way is to tell a story. About 10 years ago, I met Barbara when I was doing a lot of work on using these newfangled technologies called social media, tools like blogs for teaching and learning. And I met Barbara, who was doing some brave and breathtaking new stuff with that when she was teaching at Middlebury College. And I immediately started to exploit her ruthlessly, asking her questions, learning from her, and then throwing her at people as a dynamic speaker, because Barbara has, as you'll find out, the energy of 10 normal humans. She was a great speaker, a great workshop leader, and then I found her true passion, which is storytelling. Barbara helped connect me to the Center for Digital Storytelling, and I've fallen in love with storytelling and have been doing that ever since. And one of the ways I've been doing it is to track Barbara's work. She's been using new digital tools to help ordinary people tell their stories, their personal stories, their community stories. And she's been doing groundbreaking work ever since. One of her icons, if you look on the web, is a picture of her in an airplane or a helicopter. And you can see her vision, and she's looking forward, and past her you can see the landscape passing below. I love that image of her hurtling forward to the future and taking us on a ride, which she'll be doing tonight. Barbara, did you want to go up there and do this, or want me to turn the mic on?
I have a mic on. Oh. I'm good. Wow, thank you, Brian. Thank you so much, and thank you, Len, for inviting me here. First, before I get started, I'd love to make this a circle, so if we can just push back a little, and I know Dottie Newberger back there, let's let them in. So really, I can't tell you how much of a thrill this is to be working here in Middlebury again, because since I left teaching at Middlebury College 4 years ago to do this story work in communities and for communities, I have not talked about storytelling in my own community. I go all over the world with this work, but I don't do it here. I have, with the Vermont Community Foundation, done a whole series of workshops all over the state, but not here in Middlebury. So how thrilled I was when Brian and Len invited me to come and work with you. So I just want to go through the agenda very quickly, just so you know what to expect, what's coming, and we're just going to take a little bit of time now for everyone to introduce themselves, and I have a particular question I want to attach to that introduction. And then we're going to talk about what do we mean when we talk about storytelling in communities, and what do you mean about storytelling in communities, and why are we here tonight? We're going to have a discussion about that, and then I'm going to show you some things as it makes sense that come out of that conversation. I have lots and lots of things I can show you tonight, but I'm going to show you things that make sense for what you want and where you as a group are going to go. And then we're going to do an exercise. We're going to do some storytelling. And then we're going to have a conversation coming out of that and make some next step plans, hopefully, for this community. And when I say this community, I don't mean Middlebury. I mean Addison County is really what I throw that blanket open, because I know Cheryl lives in New Haven, and I know people here aren't just from Middlebury. So we're not going to, I'm not from Middlebury, I live in Weybridge. So that's how we're going to open it up. So what I invite everybody around the circle to do is introduce yourself and tell us all, what has story meant to you in your world, in your life? What has story and storytelling done for you or done to you? Just tell us a brief snippet of what that means to you. So we'll start with you and just go one by one around the circle.
Well, my name is Mike Ailshire, and I've been going to Lynn's meeting every month since I moved here last September. And I'm really here tonight because I see something ominous in the future about storytelling. And of course, it's nothing personal, has nothing to do with any single person. But what I've noticed, and Len started talking about it, and some other people talking about what sounds like, instead of people coming out and speaking what they're feeling and telling the story, they go home and practice this in front of a mirror and get it down to paragraphs and 5 minutes if that's what's required, and they maybe have a 10-minute version. This is abhorrent to me, and I think it would destroy what value there is. People telling things. I mean, but we assume that we're talking about things which are very personal. Some things we will share, probably more than one person has had similar experience, but I think one of the things about storytelling is that you feel it's yours. It's not just one that can be categorized and lumped together with a bunch of other ones. So I'm waiting to see what this means, because I don't know what to call it, neatening up of storytelling, I think is dangerous. I don't think it should be neat. So I'm going to see what it really means.
My name is Ann Kensick, and stories have always been really important to me all of my life. I love to write, so most of them have taken the form of writing. But I also think back when my sons were little and we'd be driving down the road and they'd say, "Mom, say a story about that tree," and I would make up a story about that tree, and how many hours we spent in the car with the kids laughing and happy about stories. And that my youngest son doesn't like to write at all, and he tells the most amazing stories. It's really fun, and I think it's also really valuable because stories that we share help knit us together, and they create a history between us that might not be there otherwise. Gives us commonality, helps us see in others what we may not see in ourselves, make us laugh. I just think it's a huge value to it. And when I heard about this in terms of community, it also made me consider the fact that, at least I'm from Lincoln, in our community we have different groups of people, some from away, some from that have been there forever. And just what a beautiful way to bring everybody together. Like this is a community, literally and in other ways. So that's why I'm here.
My name is Richard Swanson. The stories are really a part of my life as through the VNA and Addison Home Health. I work with hospice clients, and that's what really binds our relationship, is listening to, at least for me, the stories I hear are just phenomenal, and they bind myself and sharing values and listening, especially to stories of old, the last client was from Stocksboro, and listening to stories of yore, so to speak, in the early 1900s at Stocksboro is just really amazing. So it brings a relationship in the hospice setting. It really brings life to our relationship.
My name is Judy Jolera. Storytelling, to me, is a connection with my past, with my family, with my ancestors, their lives, and my continuing the storytelling to those who are coming after me. So it's a continuity of my family and community.
My name is Amy Rowell, and I'm a musician, so many of the stories in which I've been involved, have come through song, of whatever age, children, youth, adults. They're either songs that have been written that tell stories, or often to encourage people to create their own stories and put them into song. So that's where my sense of community often comes, is with those groups and through music.
I'm Mimi Hardy, and I think I've been a storyteller all my life. And I was an elementary school teacher, and it was one of the most fun of all my teaching experiences. And right now, I have a grandson who can tell the greatest stories. And so I think it's a way of communicating with all generations. And that's really important.
My name is Len Roll. I find that stories are the opening door for ease and laughter. That people become easy with you and with themselves when they hear a story, but especially when they tell their story. And that's a marvelous gift.
My name's Keith Greer. I love stories because I think they're a way to express, my condition, my experience, which is the human condition. I think it's a way to share that. I'm particularly interested in the untold stories. My profession is working with individuals with significant disabilities, people that have been disenfranchised perhaps for the majority of their lives. And I think that telling stories and hearing people's stories, it can be a great equalizer. It can allow us to find sameness and commonality in the human condition.
I'm Brian Alexander, and for me, stories are a way to think differently, to think better, to help me remember, and help me imagine the future.
My name's Karedwin Alexander, and I think stories are really the way we express, everything about our lives. You cannot have a conversation with someone without telling a story. I challenge you to do that.
My name is Lee Adkins, and I think stories are like windows of a home. You can peek in and see what's inside. And the ones that I enjoy most are the ones where there's a personal one that involves a growing human relationship with other people, either with one person or a number.
I'm Jean Rosenberg, and another thing about stories that I'm interested in is how they can help us just suddenly see things really differently than we've seen them before.
Jane Steele, and I'm here to learn from others about stories. I'm Diane Nienberger. My father was a great storyteller, and it was a fun way to learn about things, but I know nothing about it, so that's why I'm here.
My name is Leslie Regan Kayera, and I just had the great blessing of sitting yet again with my 96-year-old grandfather and listening to his stories. And I've been doing that since I was very small. And I've been, I think, consequently writing my entire life, telling stories as a filmmaker, most recently. And definitely there's a sense of, you know, from whence we come and our connection to the past, but I'm more recently really curious and inspired about, you know, what it opens up in the way of possibilities for the future as a community that we want.
My name is Jennifer Molyneux, and I had a very religious upbringing, and then I had a crisis of faith in college, and I ended up getting an undergraduate degree in philosophy, and I went on and got a master's degree in feminist theology, and I was really an atheist by the time I was done with the whole thing. And I found it was very hard to hear people fighting about what they meant by the word God. And I found I really couldn't make sense of it almost anymore. And I got to the point where I didn't want to hear people tell me what God was or what truth was, but I was endlessly fascinated to hear why they had come to believe what they believe. And I think it's a completely different outlook on truth. That we fight and we fight about what the truth is and what the definition is that's right. And I think to tell your story about what your truth is a completely different approach. And I've lived my life from there. Do you want to introduce you, just say your name? Cynthia?
I'm Claire Molyneux.
And you write stories?
I guess, yeah, I do.
I'm Mary Fillmore. I also write stories. And I think I would say that stories have been my salvation. From the time I was a small child, getting enthralled by what my parents spun for me, to the most difficult times in my life. Story is what has made it possible to go on always.
My name is Susan Shashak. I think stories for me have always been around. We used to make up stories as kids. I used to read Grimm's fairy tales all the time and love to hear the different people tell them in very different ways and get scared all over again every single time. And I find now I'm in a position with my business and sort of dabbling in social media, having to tell my story in a way that I find very exposing, but yet sort of how to do that in a way that honors what I do. And also I'm in a political arena of how to listen to all these stories and integrate it into what's best for my community, and yet not lose my story at the same time, which has been very challenging. And I found that I would like to learn how to make sure my voice doesn't get lost in everybody else's story.
I'm Cheryl Mitchell. I have a complicated relationship with stories. I think my husband and my son are both extremely good writers, and my daughter is a songwriter. But and I've worked with so many community organizations in which the mythology of our organization or our community and being able to tell the story about that organization has been what's held us together. But I also struggle a lot with people who use stories of things that I sense are not accurate or true as a way to try to get other people to change their belief systems, and I find that extremely challenging. So I'm going to start with.
My name is Joni. I think I first fell in love with stories as a little kid listening. I had a lot of problems sleeping, and I was a religious audiobook listener. And since then, I've really loved voices, just different types of voices. So particularly, I guess, stories that are in an auditory format. And I think as I've gotten older, and there's sort of, I guess, in the time of my life that I'm in, I think there's a lot of pressure about where you're going to go and what you're going to be, and sort of, and wondering like how in control of that you are. And so I always find it comforting now to sort of listen to stories and realize you never know what story you're in the middle of. And so I think that's sort of why that's continuing for me.
My name is Jeff Berman, and I think I love stories, and I guess when I think about stories and their role in my life, I think that they've always helped me to engage metaphors and symbols that I find very meaningful to the common human experience, and are very fascinating for me in that way, learning about my life, I guess, through the reverse of stories. And also, I guess, to think about the concept of a fictional or non-fictional story, and that we have kind of that black and white scenario maybe set up sometimes, but of course, no story can be fully either. So I think, also I think about the ways that stories help me to navigate and gain clarity as to maybe what I see as fictional or non-fictional dimensions of my life, and learn about that. And I just want to say that I'm really grateful to be here and part of what's been thrown in the circle. I'm very excited to hear the story of this collective tonight.
I'm Marilyn McDowell, and for me, stories make a heart connection. When I was growing up, we always sat around the dining room table, the whole family, or it was the picnic table. And I heard stories I would never, and learned things about my family that I would never have learned about. And for me, there was not nearly enough. And now I'm, I guess I started, when I was really young, teenager, writing poetry and things like that to understand myself. Now I write for children, and I love being a children's book author. I write in Claire's age. And well, because I'm a children's book author, I thought I'd better have a day job. So I started selling granola at the farmer's market. The stories that happen in these very short relationships that I have with people from all over the place. And some people will come back the next week to tell me, kind of update me as to what happened. And then they go on their way. And I'll never see them again, but I've had this amazing relationship. We've had this heart connection. And I recently talked to a group of amazing young women at the Addison County Parent-Child Center, and they wrote their stories, and some of these were really hard to read. They're actually, I think, had an exhibit at the Folk Life Center if you want to see it. But we just sat around in a circle, and we talked about telling the truth in their stories. And they talked about telling the truth when they realized that they were allowed to tell the truth when they wrote their stories. So it's a heart connection. It's just with my family, and in the writing that I do, and in these very short, amazing relationships that I get at the farmer's market. And I think it's all about heart connection. And the one thing that I'm really confused about and have a hard time with is that being a published author, you're really pressured for social media and getting out there. But yet I keep saying, but where's the heart? I feel like I'm always just plugging and pitching. For me, I'd rather be right in front of someone, and someone who's read my book will come up, and it doesn't matter that it's written for kids. There's all kinds of ages reading this book, and they'll come up and tell me what it meant to them. And I think, well, that's how it's supposed to be. And so there's this big struggle because we have all this pressure, it seems, in the world to make a lot of money. And it's not what it's about to me. So I'm here tonight because I read all about you and I thought, I'm really interested to hear what people say. And so far I've got all kinds of information, so that's it.
Deb?
Right to me.
Yeah, because you're the last one. We've gone the circle.
Wow. That was quick, great. I'm Deborah Feldman, and I'm happy to be here. Sorry I was a little late.
I think my relationship with story has become more important as I live in the Middle East, because I found myself telling a lot of stories that are about a place that people are unfamiliar with. So that has been one of the reasons that sort of propelled me to want to participate more in my story with your story and where that intersects. I think that a lot of stories have only been partially told, so we partially know about someone or something or somewhere, and then we make assumptions with that little bit of partial knowledge. And I'm just for tell more. Let's drop the assumptions and tell more stories so that we can learn more from each other about the experiences that have created who we are and how we are in this world.
Wow, what a beautiful story we just told about our different experiences with story and what it means to us. And every single one of us, because we're human, each of us have these very profound experiences with story. And scientists now, even neuroscience, evolutionary biologists, are coming to the conclusion that one of the very things that makes us human is that we tell stories. The poets, Muriel Rukeyser has said, the universe is not made of atoms, it is made of stories. And by the time we went around the full circle, you came up with most of the findings that these scientists had found, had come up with in their lab, that we tell stories to transmit culture. This is how we learn about who we are and our role within and our relationship to and what has come before us and where all that fits in. And where other cultures fit in, sort of, kind of, because we only got partial stories. We tell stories to inform people about ourselves, about our knowledge, about our world, about our ideas, about our feelings. We tell stories to learn. We actually tell stories to learn. When we hear our own selves tell stories, we learn a lot more about what we think about stuff. As well as hearing people's stories, we learn about ourselves. And we tell stories, which every single person in here tonight said. We tell stories to connect. To connect. That trust begins to build when we hold out that hand and we reach across that circle and tell that story. Or reach across that space. The shortest distance between two people is a story. So that's what we do as human. And to me, what's so interesting in this work over this last decade, when I walked out of the classroom and into community, is how we're all just hungering for some relationship with story that, even though we do it all the time because we're human and we have to and we have no choice, we want something more with story. We want it to be something else in our lives. We want to connect. Maybe it's sometimes more formally. Maybe we want to have that chance to come together, and sometimes it takes a little formality. It takes a Len to convene a group and say, let's tell stories, which in other days gone by, we may not have needed that because we had gathering spaces that are vanishing. What we call the other places, the third places, the barbershops, the diners, the churches, the cafes, all of these places where we just gather and just sit around and tell stories. We're learning more and more and more that is changing. Now, I would challenge you not to just immediately say that's bad, but just to say it's changing. And these new modes of communication are only modes. They're not good, they're not bad. They are. So how might we think about using them for good, to bring us together instead of distancing us? Because actually the new generation is going to engage with these tools. So we don't need to engage with these tools at all tonight. We can talk about this sort of storytelling, story circles being in place and in person if that's what you'd like to do. If you want to take a look at how some communities are also tying in some of the newest ways to tell stories to do the very oldest things in very beautiful and profound ways, we can do that too. So you know, we're a great big group here, which I think is really fantastic. And I want this to be for us and together, you know, what would be the most powerful thing for us to do. And what I'm gathering from what's going on here, there was so little talk about sort of the new ways of telling stories. It's really this urge to just sit in a room. I mean, just how fantastic, how quiet. Did you notice how quiet it was? How intense everyone listened? That was a lot of people to go around and tell and have that introduction. No one, you know, sort of spaced out. Everybody was really interested in each other. So I gather that maybe this community, meaning this group who comes from all over Addison County, what I'm reading in the room is that you're really interested in how can we do more with this kind of coming together in a physical, actual physical space to do some story work, to do story sharing. I'm asking this as a question. Is that what I'm reading, you know, or are we wanting to move into this newer realm? I don't get that at all, that you want to move into this newer. We can do another night with a new realm, and then do tonight. How can we do? What are some ways that we within our communities we can actually start to build a movement, as Len has put it. He would like to start a storytelling movement, not just in Addison County, but everywhere. Starting here, though. Am I reading this right? Yes?
That's right.
Okay. Everybody in agreement? Anybody very much against that? Okay. Anybody wants to talk about new stuff? Come see me after or another time. All right. So here's the question. I've got a storytelling exercise that I want to put you through, which is one where we're actually doing some story work together. And it's an exercise that I think will be a really great way to open up the conversation of what are some of the ways we can bring storytelling of this sort of sitting in a room and having people excited to be together to share stories within. Now, so you already are doing it in your families. You're already doing it with the people who are closest to you. You might be doing it in you're totally doing it in your workplace, but you may not be calling it that. It's just, you know, you stop by somebody's desk and you share a little anecdote from what happened last night or this morning or that awful thing in my report. And you do share stories like that, but how can we actually use this kind of urge that's human to do good in the world and to bring us together and to share and to connect over whatever and to keep and I loved hearing all this. You know, there are all these stories, but how do we keep our own story within that? Or how do we, you know, make sure it's the truth of the story? You know, the story is telling some sort of truth. So this is what I think we'll do, is we'll go right into this exercise and then out of it talk about how there are ways we can use this sort of exercise to work in the world and become a storytelling culture again, in a way. Not just be storytelling species, you know, creatures, but a culture that's a storytelling culture. Does that sound good to everybody? Instead of me presenting, that, you know, we don't need me to present. You guys are great. Okay. All right. Let me explain the exercise. We all know this area. We're fond of it. It is our home. It is Addison County. And we all have stories that take place, are about, have something to do with particular locations on this map. We may all have some of the same stories about certain places, but we all have individual stories as well that we could tell. So what I'm going to do is distribute 2 colors of dots to each of you. You're going to get, and Len just got the jazziest dots that exist. And they're jewels, actually. So that's good, because stories are jewels, right? And you each get a silver jewel and a red ruby jewel. And the silver jewel, you'll each place, and as one occurs to you, just get up and go put it there, because we're such a big group that, you know, we're all going to just stand in line or something at the So actually, let's start. And you pass this one this way. You take one silver and one red while I'm explaining, and you pass this one this way. That the silver dot you place on a location on this map where you know a story. You could tell a story that either takes place there, is about that, or something about that spot in the map prompts you to think of this story. I mean, it could be a story that takes place somewhere else, but there's something about that place, okay? So you come and you place that, and as soon as you guys already have dots, you can go up and place your dot. Now, your red dot is, I want you to put a red dot on a place on this map where you would like to hear a story about. You would like, wow, what is this place? What is this place? Maybe it's a place you don't know very well in Addison County, or maybe it's a place you've heard a lot about and you'd love to hear a story about it. It's a place you're really fond of. Maybe it's one of the place I think immediately is of one of the rivers that everybody goes to swim in. Maybe you have a story about that place, but maybe you want to hear somebody else's story about that place. Okay, is everybody clear about that? We're not all going to be able to tell these stories, but we're all, because we're just too big a group, but we're all going to be able to place those, and then a few of us will share stories, okay? Does everybody get that? So start thinking about if you are called upon to share one of a story, what might that be? Your silver dot story. So go on up, crowd around. It's really important too as storytellers to feel comfortable kind of jostling about. In a group like this where you come to a gathering to some of the groups that you already belong to. I mean, it's one thing for you to come to this room, right? It's one thing. You made a decision. You're one of the believers. So you're here because you are a storyteller. You're really interested in it. But what about all those people around you who are so busy? How do you bring this to your own work? How do you bring this to your own group or community? Anybody have any ideas, anything they want to share before I make some comments about that?
Well, there's one that started happening in our town. I live in Ripton with my wife and other people, but she's the most important. But a few years ago, we had a town crisis where our post office almost got closed. It was a complicated thing, but they threatened to close our post office, so we went to the nearest post office and protested. About half our town showed up. And so having 150 people appear at the East Middlebury post office was a bit of a shock to staff there. And we saved our post office. It's been a big deal. And now we're thinking about redesigning it and maybe renewing it. And so all those stories are coming back. I remember standing in line there, and I remember being worried. I remember helping save all this. So that kind of reflection back at some of those stories.
Certainly during times of crisis, this is when stories naturally just come out. Irene was a huge spurring of stories. Really everyone had a story and wanted to share it suddenly. Suddenly that kind of decorum that covers us and the nicety and the reserve that we have comes down, and you reach forward across that space much more readily to share stories. So yes, during times of crisis, there'll be stories being told. But we often look for these big moments where we can bring stories together. But what about the little moments? What about the little opportunities we have to do really profound storytelling? In my work over the last 10 years, I have found that the most successful story efforts have not started because a group decided we're going to have a storytelling movement, or we're going to put on this great story event and you're all going to come, because the same 15 people will come and no one else, because it's really quite intimidating. Because we now have this relationship with storytelling where we equate it with performance. And so we don't see ourselves as storytellers. We see ourselves maybe as story listeners, if we're lucky. And we don't go. Or we go to the town hall theater because a really famous storyteller is there and we really want to enjoy that fun. But so how do we do it in a way that we weave storytelling so deeply into the fabric of all we do wherever we go? That's what I would like to see happen. And I think there have been places where this has indeed happened. And the way that I've seen it grow beautifully is by each person who is interested in this sort of movement making, who wants to engage with story on this sort of level, has to take a look at his or her own world and say, okay, who do I work with? What groups do I belong to, both formal and informal? And how might I seed those places, those meetings, those events with some really gentle storytelling? Not this big, we're going to do a storytelling project where we're all going to capture the stories of the elders before they get lost. Yes, sometimes that works. But mostly, what if you said every meeting, let's start, just start the meeting with a sharing of story. We started this meeting with a sharing, in a way, of story. So starting every meeting with story. Just make that be what you do. Start with story. What if you have the events that already occur, instead of creating a new event, a new movement, seeding it into those events that happen? For instance, in a community I worked with in Idaho, they had events where there were lots of things around suppers. Every group had a supper. There was the church suppers, there was the grain suppers, there were the thises and the that's. That's just how this town did things. And naturally, people were kind of telling stories, but they were kind of telling stories in the clusters of the people they already hung with. So you always you always stood with those three people at the supper and told those stories. And so we worked with, how do you actually get the people to sit around a table? Well, you set up the space so people have to sit in bigger groups. And then you invite stories to be told around that particular reason, the theme, why you're together, you're gathering together. And then you can seed from there projects. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we captured some of these stories, perhaps, if that was what you wanted to do, is you wanted to, these are precious stories about all the people in the community, and somehow we want to have them. We can publish them in a book. Starksboro did this very thing. They gathered many, many, many stories, and they produced a book. And maybe we want to have these stories just go into the air. We just want to share them and then have them go into the air. And some of the seeds of them will come back down to us at another time. Or maybe we want to embed these stories somehow in the landscape somehow. We want to bring some visual artists somehow to engage with these stories and produce things for our community that have to do with these very stories. So starting small and within your own groups, how can we use story every day? How can I promote storytelling by the way I act in every place that I go and all the people I belong to? Like, my piano students come and we start with a story. Tell me a story about the music you played last night. Tell me a story about, your work. And I remember you, Dottie, from you working with teens. Tell me a story. Ask for story rather than always volunteering story. Ask for it. To build a story movement, it really takes that kind of feathering out. Now, lots of groups like this, we would actually create a network map. If you're serious about creating a story movement in this Addison County, and this is going to help us in a minute in a way, you do a network map where each of you plot out what are the groups that you belong to, informally and formally, and where do they exist in the community? Where's there really a lot of us, oh my gosh, we all ride horses. Well, maybe we should do some sort of story work around that. And then you pull it out to the next place, and the next place, and the next place. Now, you can also do story events, of course, that go along with this. But planning it in informal, the most effective ways that I've seen them start is to start informally. And then you seed it. And I have lots of ideas. I have a handout, a 9-page handout for you all to leave with tonight on some of these kinds of ideas and some of the places where you can go see them. But I think it's really important. Does anybody have any questions or want to add something to that? That's my one little spiel of the night. Any other ideas? Any other ways that you've seen it happen? Does this make sense to you? Does anybody do this already? How many of you participate in active storytelling culture where you work? You do in your homes. I know you do in your homes, but in your workplaces. All right. Teachers. That's good. That's great. How about in the other informal groups that you belong to? Do you start in story? That's the start.
We had a group and stories. We had the kids write their stories and attach them to helium balloons, and we let them go. And whoever found one of the balloons, there was a note to say, pass the story on.
Okay, so here we have, case in point, a really beautiful example of a story project. Did anybody know about this story project?
It happened in Ithaca, New York.
But we are the holders of so much knowledge and wisdom and experience in story that one of the ways you can do is create a story bank of story ideas, of projects we've already done, of the kinds of story work we want to do. Are we trying to build future stories? Are we trying to tell the past stories? Are we really interested in the stories of right now? And the different groups that are interested in the different things can kind of take on, I'm going to try this, and then you can reconvene. You know, every month, come together, strictly around this. How are we building this? How are we doing it? What's going on? Where's the momentum here? Where's the mass? And then you can do cool things online too. Because there's going to be people in your community who want to do that. And there's no reason to shut that out and down. Because it's really fun. Okay. What we have here is interesting. Did everybody put dots up here?
Half of them don't stick.
Oh no, they didn't stick. Okay. This is the exercise, and we're going to do it quite quickly. And it's a wonderful exercise because story work can be done quickly. One of the things you worry about is, oh my gosh, we're going to, it goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. No, we're going to do 1-minute stories now, and we're going to be in groups of 4, and only 2 stories are going to get told because we're going to get the feeling of this exercise with just 2 stories. In each group of 4, one person will be telling a white dot story, and one person will tell a red dot story, okay? Because all the dots fell off, we can't do this quite as designed. The way, and I'll explain the way it's designed because it's really a great exercise, is that people, you come up and you look at this, your small group, and you say, and what you do is you ask for the stories because this is what we've forgotten to do is listen. And that is the most important part of telling a story is listening. And so we actually look at the red dots and say, oh my gosh, I want to hear that story in the middle of Lake Champlain. Would you tell me that story? And to feel that moment of somebody saying that to you, what does that mean to be that person who's been invited? But what does that mean to really want to hear a story about a particular place? So we can't do that. So what we'll do in these groups of 4 is let's just get 2 volunteers. One who's going to tell a white dot story, and one who gets to, and then this is hard. How do you do the red dot in this particular way? You each say where your red dot stories are, And if you know a story of that red dot place, then you volunteer to tell that story. If nobody has one of those red dots, if it doesn't match, then we'll do 2 white dot stories within each group. Does that make sense to everybody? Does that work? Do you get the original though? Because I don't want you to lose that original. Because it's a really great exercise. You guys should do that wherever you are. Go home tonight and do that. Because you'd be really surprised just in a family how this works. You thought you knew everything the same as everybody else in your family, and you do not. Okay, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, and 5. Yes. Does every group have a silver dot story to be told? Okay. Does everybody have a silver dot? I'll start you. Don't start yet. I know everybody wants.
And my white dot story is
You're still choosing. They're still choosing.
Okay.
You guys have you have both your stories ready?
We have one.
Okay, I will time you. The person who's going to share that story, go ahead.
Two silver legs around it, and then back. I was running almost the whole way there with lots of really tired.
I've always been warm.
Stop and just don't talk about it. Just feel it. Take a minute. Just take a minute. Just feel it. We're not used to silence either. Okay, has everybody chosen a red dot story? Okay, take a second to decide on that one. Yeah, is there?
Well, I've just read that.
Tell your story. So one thing I want to that can come out of this, right? First of all, you lean forward and you want to actually learn more, and more stories will come. Stories beget stories, right? Did you find that you wanted to talk more about it, either get a little more information about something, or that reminds me, and there's a new story in the air, but I didn't let you do any of that. I'm really interested in you now thinking about and talking for just a couple of minutes in your small group about that particular experience. And then we're going to come back into the larger group. And my colleague Mary, who is a great facilitator, is going to then facilitate a short discussion about this work, because what we're doing now is modeling what can happen and what is a formal storytelling sort of environment. So that once you take it out of your living room and out into community events or into your workplaces in a formal way, suddenly you invoke story by asking specifically and designing and orchestrating the moment. So what happens? I'm really interested in you reflecting a little bit about what happened in this storytelling moment for you, because it was orchestrated, and yet you clearly were leaning forward to each other and telling stories. Okay? So take a couple minutes and then we'll come back to the larger group. Because no one is talking about the storytelling moment. Everybody's talking about the stories. And this is exactly a very interesting human urge. But I want now you all to kind of turn. You don't have to, move your chairs too much because each group is going to now do a little sharing with Mary.
So I want to start over here to my right. And we're eager for you to just capture a bit of the essence of what was said as you reflected on what was that moment, what happened in that storytelling moment, what was compelling about it, what was irritating about it, what was usable about it. Great, thank you.
Well, I was just saying that with both of the stories, even though I'm very new to Vermont and obviously I've never been to these places or were in the happening of the stories, I found myself having very vivid images of where the stories were being told, like I was standing right there. And because of that, the emotion of both stories was imparted, very deeply to me, how I was bringing those stories to life in my own self. And particularly the second story, which was relating to death and was, for me, made me kind of sad. And right when the minute ended, I was left with this very vivid image of course, the thing I didn't see, but that was morbid, and I was left with that and wanting resolution from the storyteller. But
thank you. So even in 1 minute, a lot of emotion was conveyed. Wonderful. Thank you. Anyone else in this group have something they wanted to say?
What I was saying is that they were both sort of animal and human interaction and observation, and that the one I found very humorous and the other one I found much more troubling, but yet each time that we got interrupted, I'm like, I want to know what happened.
So when we think about the storytelling moment, it's very frustrating if it's truncated. On the other hand, better that you should be hungry for more than feeling, oh, here he goes again.
Definitely.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. How about this group over here?
For me, I don't know the rules of storytelling. Never having been here, don't know anything about storytelling. And I wanted to know if it was acceptable to ask questions of the storyteller. Because I was interested in more information. And, but I did not do it during that minute because I thought that probably wasn't one of the rules. So who knows? But
So
she did a great job, but I just wanted a little more information.
Surely. So having some way to pose those questions might be part of the frame that you would want to take with you wherever you went.
And as I say, is that done in storytelling?
Great. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah. Someone else?
We wanted more.
We wanted more. Good. So a moment wasn't quite long enough. Good. Thank you.
I feel like it's really not surprising that no one could think of a story in the middle of Lake Champlain. How are we supposed to know of something in the middle of Lake Champlain?
Can anyone respond to her question?
Yeah, I have one.
Okay. You can ask them about it later.
Later.
I didn't know it was one until afterwards.
Good. Thanks so much. How about you four?
We noticed that with the first, immediately we were all grabbed.
Yes, so. And isn't it interesting, this group mentioned also that they had a very pleasant subject and they had what one person at least referred to as a morbid subject. And even with only 1 minute and a minute of silence between, people made the transition, didn't they? So that one of the things the storytelling moment gives us is that transition, that changing of gears from one modality or set of emotions or set of locations to another, even that quickly.
And we noticed that we didn't know what was going to happen in both cases, and that's what drew us all into a single point of attention. We wanted to know.
So curiosity, we were talking a lot earlier as we went around about what we have in common as humans, and certainly curiosity is one of those things. So it's a way for us to tap into that, isn't it? Great, thank you. How about you guys?
I did it. It was very intimate. But it was very intimate and it was immediate.
We were I was talking because I thought it was interesting how stories make me start drawing a picture of a person in my head, and it might not be right, but it starts to make me more interested in them because I want to see how much of my picture is correct.
As you draw in your mind. Brian, you had something.
What's your name?
Yeah.
You asked about the rules of storytelling. And I was thinking about that because the two different stories began in the opposite way. My wife, correctly, began her story. In the middle of the night, these things happened. She started telling us in a very detailed way. We were thrown in the middle of this, and she used some jargon that I wasn't quite familiar with. We were still pulled along. And then Nancy did the exact opposite. She began her story with, well, here's this town, and it's important to get there. And she gradually drew us down detail by detail until the vision kind of shrunk down eventually to a window that you could see out of. And I loved how the two different stories began with these totally different rules. You know, it's kind of in medias res, we'll just bam, go in the middle without any explanation. And then hers was more gentle, that you introduced us step by step. So I was thinking, if you want to know rules of stories, those are two different rules right there.
Thank you. So much for rules. We've disposed of that. Now we can move on.
No, it's this group. Yeah.
It was immediate that one person in the first story, we knew, part of us knew that story, and one of us didn't, and it was great how the questions, and there were questions asked about what we were talking about by the person who didn't know what we were talking about. And it was sort of a funny story. The second story was and immediately we felt sympathy with the storyteller. It was a sad story, a story that left us with, well, what can be done about this? What kind of a decision could be made? It was very interesting how different they both were.
It's interesting how many different tones came across as we talk about this. And you mentioned the word intimate. Clearly people were willing to risk talking about some things and providing some stories that weren't just in the realm of the pleasant and the straightforward.
Yeah.
So it evoked something different and deeper. Thank you. Anyone else from that group have something to say? Okay, please.
I enjoyed the interaction when Rich told his story, which was very compelling. He just said, here's what happened, and he told what was going on and how he felt, and I loved it that Mike just leaned right in and said, yes, have you heard of, and just instantly, and they were like, yeah, if we were at a bar school, this would be what we're doing, and it was very, it was really neat to watch.
So as we reflect on what happened in these brief moments, I think the question for all of us is, how can we help make this happen for other people? How can we, wherever we go, carry this with us in some sense and give others the kind of permission that we were given to tell these stories? How can we ask people in a way that they can respond and in a way that invites a real response, not just a perfunctory, my story is I've had kind of a rough day, or that kind of vagueness, but something that can ground us in the actuality of their lives, whether it's the cheerier sort of story or whether it's the other kind of story or something even more mixed. So I think now you're going to move on to talking a bit about next steps and what could happen from here.
I'm sorry, could I ask you a question?
Yeah. Sure.
Just something you just said, which
sure.
seems to me. You used the phrase, the actuality of someone's life. And then you suggested we find ways to bring this out from people. And that's the part I have a hard time with, Because I don't think this is just something you turn on like having breakfast.
No.
And it kind of diminishes the problems in getting people to tell stories that mean something to them. It happened, my colleague here saved this whole group. One person, well, he had a story, and he told it, the bones of it, and I had a little something to add to it, which made it more amusing, but that's it. And if, you know, if things had been slightly different, that wouldn't happen. So I think it's more difficult than you're suggesting to get people to talk about it, because most of our lives we're not telling stories. We're doing things, trying to get you to date.
So if I could rephrase your question a little, but I hope reflected accurately, how much is the appropriate amount of structure to evoke a story in a way that is not intrusive, that invites, and that will get the kind of response that is a story?
Very good.
So
And
now
I
we
think-
can refer it to the expert.
And I think that there's one very important question that we have not yet asked. And that is, why do you all want to create some sort of storytelling movement beyond the kind of storytelling you're already doing in your lives? That you want story, you're interested in story, but what does this mean when we actually try to take it out of the natural spaces of storytelling as it just occurs in our day with the people we want to share, and perhaps bring story to other places in our lives, and actually to slow down a minute to share the stories? Because we've just seen in this room, and you see this every time there's a storytelling group that comes together, what happens when you do come together and share stories. So there are always going to be degrees of comfort and discomfort with sharing stories. Some people are naturally going to have access to their stories and feel comfortable sharing them in different kinds of groups, and other people are not going to feel that. So that's one of the things that I was interested in. Would that come out tonight? How would people feel in this more artificial kind of environment? You don't know me, and why am I asking you to do this? And what does this have to do with anything? And this is precisely a mistake that a lot of groups make when they go out to build storytelling movements, is they think they can just go out and we start and we give all these themes and we're going to march out to this group and that group and do story work. And it never comes. Or people come and they don't like it. Or they come once and think it's great, but I'm kind of busy. So I want to, with that, that's why I was really interested in it. And I love this because you didn't want to answer my question. You wanted to talk about how these stories made you feel, or you wanted to ask more, or you talked about the intimacy of it and in the moment. That what was extraordinary about it is almost everybody, in spite of the artificial context within which we are sitting, had things to share and wanted to hear. Now, this is artificial, but you came here willingly. So, that's a little different. So here you are, and you're leaving here tonight. And how, why do you want to build this? Where do you want to build this? And how can we start to build this, the next steps to take in order to do that? This sort of story sharing is natural and wonderful and great, but there are other kinds of story sharing too. There's writing. People can write you stories. They can ask for stories in writing. Photography, you can have image stories. People can share them in many, many ways that they feel comfortable doing. Does somebody want to engage with that question about, okay, now that you've seen how it feels in a little bit more artificial and controlled way, which is what often happens when you start to bring these to your groups. And you work with it. Okay, you started meeting, everybody wants to. Yes, Keith?
Well, I'll take a poke at it. there's a fear. I have a fear. I'm afraid. And I'm trying to explore really what that fear is, but I know it's a fear because it's an emotion. And the fear is something like this. Like, I have this fear that there's something human in us that's being lost. Kind of like to your point earlier. Like, but that's a fear. And in some ways, I think that it's an irrational fear. Or it's an unjustified fear because my experience tells me that I'm a human being and that I keep sharing myself. And despite how vulnerable I might look or the fear in that, I just keep doing it in this storytelling way and getting to know people. So maybe it's an unjustified fear. But that's where my concern lies. Is like, I feel like as we're progressing and incorporating more and more technology in our world, and I have kids, so they're teenagers, so I know that that's playing in there too. But my fear is that we're losing something human as we're progressing. And storytelling is a way, it's a practice, face-to-face storytelling in particular, but storytelling in general, is a way to maintain, to have fidelity to humanity. And that's what it is. And I fear that we're not. So that just...
And so there's this hunger, though, in this room for that. And I would say everywhere I go with this work, everybody's hungry for it. So there's this, precisely because since we are human, even if we're trying to ignore that, we do want to tell stories and we do want to be in these situations. But so what are you going to do to come out of this room and take another step? What's the next step? You know, you may be fearful, you may have reservations about this, but what are you going to do as individuals? I mean, it's almost like, are we going to take a pledge here tonight? What would be that step, that very practical small step that each of you can take to start building storytelling within your world? I'm giving you a lot of practical advice in this pamphlet that I'm, these pages that I'm going to give you. And each of you might find them useful or not find them useful, depending on your situation, which is why I'm really reluctant to say, here's the 10-step process and you too can build storytelling. No, it's got to come, as we've seen how individual it is here tonight, how we all have different relationships with our stories and story. Yes, Leslie.
I'm not sure that this is a next step, but it's a question. I hope that leaves that way. I've been very involved with the natural gas pipeline and the question that is for a very large community, not just Addison County, even broader community than that. And one of the things I noticed early on at the first Public Service Board hearing, in 3 hours of the testimony, there were there was one that stood out. There was a young man, a farmer, who got up to the mic and he told his story. And most everybody else, myself included, made great arguments. They talked about facts, all of that kind of debate. And I thought to myself, like right then and there, I mean, I know that is the most compelling thing that I heard anyway, and yet to be involved, even in our local town, whatever the venues, what do you do when you're within a venue where telling personal story isn't what it's about? I mean, it's about what facts, what data, what, arguments back and forth. How do you create an opening where the personal stories that I'm hearing them in other places and back, like that, how are they brought forth into those forums? And I don't mean like a letter to the editor because people are doing that, but I mean as the substance of these gatherings of our communities.
We each have to take a stand and do that. The first way, I've been in communities that have actually been trying to build story exactly the same way that you've asked here. And the Public Service Board or the whatever board is not going to be inclined to want everybody to stand up and tell stories, because typically then it goes on and on and on and they think it's off point. But instead, if you can see a movement within your community, say, stand up when it's your turn to talk and tell a short story. Tell your story like that farmer did, because you'll never forget it. They'll never forget it. No one in the room will forget it. A story can change the world. Margaret Mead talked about that. One story can change the world. So tell that. You tell the story. You take that responsibility. And you can build a story bank outside of those venues. Go gather the stories. Gather the people who have stories, who want to tell the stories. Yeah, you can put the sign in your lawn, but you can tell the story. Let's tell that.
What is a story bank?
Story bank is just like in movements, change movements, to gather stories from both sides, all sides. Anybody who wants to can come tell a story. It can be recorded, you can write it down, they can give you your stories, they can send it on postcards. Tell us your story, whatever it is. We want to know as a community about this issue. And that's a way that you can start to gather and then have those available to the town, the community. Maybe you're gonna, maybe after that meeting, stay for stories. Maybe you can't be at that meeting, but there could be a second one. So they're really practical ways to do that. Somebody over here wanted to say something. And, we're gonna be at 8:30 very soon, but I'm happy to stay a little bit longer. If you want to stay another 15 minutes to continue this, if you want to go, or Len, do you have to wrap it up?
You don't need to wrap it up, but if people need to go.
If people need to go, you should go, and not feel bad about that, but please stay if you like, if you have very specific things we want to sort of grapple with, because you're all coming here for different reasons. And that's, you're not just this one story group. You people come from all over the county. So yes, go ahead.
So I have been telling stories or encouraging storytelling in kindergarten, first and second grade ever since I moved here 8 years ago, because I've been following my grandchildren through those years. And it's amazing how in kindergarten they begin to tell their stories with pictures, drawing things and telling their story. And then eventually as they're able to write short stories. But it takes they get so excited when they have a voice. And that's what I feel, that storytelling gives people a voice.
That's exactly what
just like you were talking. But it's just as important for a 5-year-old to have a voice as it is somebody at a meeting about the pipeline.
So we're talking different circles, different layers. Everyone in this room has a different group and community that you're very interested in to do story work. So you might be championing story work with children. And how do you build that within the schools, within any of the agencies that are working with children? Not to capture children's stories, but I love how you were saying to have the children tell their stories. So we have this sense of this growing, wow, this is a really wonderful thing. So you don't have to be fearful anymore, because those kids are doing it. It's here, it's gonna stay. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, especially Leslie, when you were talking, it seems like maybe also turning people's eyes to the stories that are occurring, or the story of that experience of a given, people in a room with a board with statistics that have come from somewhere, that have meaning, that will go somewhere. That maybe also just unveiling the stories that are occurring or developing, unveiling the web of stories that brings meaning or context or coherence to any given situation, that maybe that's also a way to facilitate story, as opposed to explicitly looking for a new interpretation or a new story to be added to something.
Yes, Dottie.
The Vermont Community Foundation, I wrote a grant for them this year, and they asked for all kinds of facts and figures. And then they have this question is, tell us the reason, tell us the inspiration, tell us the story of why you want this grant. And believe me, it was the story that got me the grant. It wasn't all those facts and figures, so they can be very powerful.
That's right.
It seems we're also talking at the moment about, mostly about current stories and about our personal stories, or stories that are very close to us, either generationally or, well, certainly in this case, Addison County was our focus. But I think it's also important that we unearth original stories, and maybe in our individual heritage, or maybe just the stories we all know. That there are stories that you hear over and over again, but there's so many different versions, and if we can go back and back and back and try to find out, well, where does that story really come from? Where are the origins? What are the sources of these stories? Because the stories have been around forever and ever and ever as teachers, and they are alive, the stories themselves, and they've taken on many forms. Sometimes the forms that we get are really perhaps embellished in ways that we need to take off some of that and go back and see if we can find some source.
know, it's important that we go back and look at old stories.
And certainly that's one of the movements for some people in storytelling. What I love about this gathering here tonight is you each have your own passion for story and your reason and the kind of story you want to work with and the kind of story you want to unearth. And so that is really, so Deborah, maybe that you want to invite people who are interested in that particular way of looking at story and those kinds of stories, and you engage in a group and start talking about how are we going to do this? How might we do this? And you might want to talk about social movements and change movements and how are we going to start storytelling for that. So people are starting to move out right now, and we don't have anything, nothing has concrete has come out of here for you to say this is the next thing that we're going to do. What I hope, and there are handouts, oh, they're getting them. I hope what you feel is not just that you want to share that it's such a great thing to sit in a room and tell your personal stories, but there is this greater reason for us to tell stories as humans, that we need stories as much as we need food. And it is sustenance, it is who we are. And so how do we take responsibility, each of us, to start to, if we feel it's fading, if we feel it's in danger of dropping away, what is our passion for story? What is our place? And I think that's really emerging tonight. I'm interested in this part of story. This is what I'm wanting to do with story. I'm interested in finding out more about that. And not building a single movement, but to start to take on pieces that we each can do and grow a practice in our own lives and with the people around us and the groups that we belong to, and invite people from this room. This is the way that I've really seen, again, the storytelling to take hold and do powerful and beautiful things. And there are lots of examples of that going on in communities. And it's just started with a few people saying, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Len?
Yeah, just say, well, thank you for tonight. And our hope would be, someone asked me, where is this movement and where is it going? And I said, I don't know. It depends upon people who come and people who get a passion and an interest or want to take it in a direction. And well, those are what we can all try to do is to do that. But then we can also try to say, what are some clues here? And let's do some improvisation. Let's do some connecting, and that becomes what will open up for us. So that's what we really want to do, is invite you to that. We don't have a grand plan, not at all. But the grand plan is in this whole question of asking for stories, listening to stories, sharing stories, and then looking for the places in the community where we live, and all the things that we've talked about tonight. So,
and Len, you